My mother-in-law accused me of parental alienation, $120,000 in evaluations. All proved it was a lie. I sued for malicious prosecution, won $650,000. She lost contact with her grandson. My mother-in-law formally accused me of parental alienation in a devastating legal proceeding that cost $120,000 in specialized psychological evaluations, all proving categorically, scientifically, unquestionably, that the accusations were maliciously fabricated lies. I sued her criminally for malicious prosecution. I won $650,000 in multiple court-ordered damages. She completely, definitively, irreversibly lost all contact with the grandson she falsely claimed to be protecting. Before we continue this devastating story of systemic family manipulation and justice, finally realized after years of intense psychological suffering, please subscribe to the channel and tell us where you're listening from through the comments so we can build a supportive community of people sharing similar experiences of family psychological abuse disguised as legitimate concern. My full and true name is Laura Cristina Almeida. I'm 38 years old with a life intensely lived among sophisticated residential garden beds, where I meticulously plant green hopes for dreaming clients. Endless meetings with temperamental suppliers of exotic ornamental plants that invariably arrive damaged, requiring exhausting negotiations. And a 13-year marriage that I discovered progressively, painfully, devastatingly to be a meticulously constructed psychological prison, not only by my weak, manipulable husband, but mainly by his narcissistic, controlling mother-in-law, who transformed my naive trust and genuine maternal love into cruel psychological weapons used systematically, calculatedly, relentlessly against me during endless years of emotional warfare disguised as legitimate family concern. I'm an independent landscape architect who's worked autonomously for 12 years, building a solid, respected professional reputation through impeccably executed projects, satisfied clients enthusiastically recommending services, an obsessive dedication transforming ordinary outdoor spaces into personalized natural living, reflecting each meticulous homeowner's unique dreams. For 13 absolutely draining, emotionally devastating, and psychologically exhausting years, I was married to Rodrigo Mendez Costa, a man who initially presented himself as a supportive partner, encouraging professional ambitions, but gradually, subtly, insidiously revealed himself as a controlled extension, obedient marionette, submissive instrument of his domineering mother, absolutely incapable of establishing necessary healthy boundaries or defending his vulnerable wife against increasingly aggressive and destructive systematic psychological attacks. The terrifying, devastating, transformative, and ultimately revealing story I'm about to narrate now, with every painful detail permanently etched in my traumatized memory, began on an apparently ordinary, banal morning without any indication of the personal apocalypse that was about to catastrophically collapse on my existence like a avalanche in February, when I woke up at 6:30 in the morning after a particularly sleepless night, disturbed by recurring, distressing nightmares where I completely, irreversibly lost custody of my son Miguel, then only 5 innocent years old, his angelic little face crying desperately, while cold, indifferent court officials violently tore him from my protective maternal arms to permanently hand him over to people who falsely claimed to care less about his well-being than they supposedly genuinely cared. Rodrigo had already left early, supposedly for a promised job interview, but probably non-existent. Like so many other fantastical opportunities, he claimed to diligently pursue, while in reality spending entire mornings at his manipulative mother's house, drinking coffee servilely prepared by her, patiently listening to psychological venom methodically distilled against me, submissively nodding, passively agreeing with every poisonous criticism authoritatively pronounced by the dominant toxic family matriarch. Miguel was still sleeping deeply, peacefully in his little bed, decorated with colorful dinosaur-printed sheets he passionately adored. The regular, gentle breathing of an innocent child, blessedly temporarily oblivious to the devastating adult emotional storms constantly happening around him, progressively, subtly, but inexorably, poisoning the family atmosphere. I prepared strong, aromatic coffee, trying to awaken a brain numbed by chronic lack of restorative sleep, accumulated during endless months of persistent anxiety, feeling a crushing, suffocating weight in my chest that had become an unwanted, constant companion since the malicious accusations began insidiously infiltrating casual family conversations months ago. The phone rang shrill, unexpectedly at 7:15 in the morning, a socially inappropriate hour for non-emergency calls, and when I answered hesitantly, with an inexplicable but absolutely retrospectively justified growing premonition, an authoritative Colds, professionally distant voice of a court officer formally identifying himself announced that I was officially being notified about a legal proceeding initiated against me requesting compulsory psychological evaluation to investigate serious concerning potentially criminal allegations of parental alienation supposedly practiced systematically, deliberately, cruelly against my own son through sophisticated emotional manipulations aimed at destroying his relationship with his father and legitimate paternal family, genuinely concerned about the seriously threatened child's psychological well-being. The words pierced through my consciousness like frozen blades cutting vital tissue, each syllable methodically, bureaucratically pronounced by the indifferent officer echoing apocalyptically inside my skull like funeral bells announcing the death of the familiar, comfortable, known life. Parental alienation. I, who devoted absolutely every available moment, every gram of emotional energy, every penny arduously saved to my deeply beloved son's physical, emotional, educational well-being, was being formally, officially, legally accused of psychologically harming him through deliberate emotional manipulations. The cruel, devastating, incomprehensible irony of the situation completely momentarily crushed me. Exactly the people, genuinely, provably, systematically practicing manipulative psychological alienation against me and against the natural, healthy maternal relationship were criminally, maliciously, strategically inverting the roles of victim and perpetrator through a misinformed judicial system, easily manipulable by convincingly constructed, superficially plausible but fundamentally false narratives when rigorously examined under adequate scientific scrutiny. I hung up the phone with hands trembling uncontrollably, violently, legs wobbly, barely sustaining a body, suddenly heavy as melted lead. Heart beating irregular, erratic like a war drum, painfully hammering against ribs compressed by suffocating growing panic, I sat heavily, awkwardly in the nearest kitchen chair before completely collapsing on the cold ceramic floor. Shallow, accelerated breathing indicating the onset of a fulminant panic attack that had become an unwanted, frequent visitor during previous months of progressively accumulated psychological stress. Miguel appeared sleepy, innocent in the kitchen doorway, rubbing confused green eyes, adorable disheveled brown hair, holding his inseparable, worn, beloved stuffed dinosaur, asking in a worried little voice, inappropriate for his childhood age, "Mommy, why are you crying? Are you hurt? Can I help you?" His genuine, pure concern, completely unconscious of the destructive adult machinations devastatingly happening around him, broke me completely, temporarily, and I hugged him tight, protectively, desperately, while hot tears uncontrollably streamed down, wetting his soft hair, whispering necessary comforting lies that everything would be okay. Eventually, though I didn't sincerely believe it in that devastating apocalyptic moment, I called immediately, frantically, desperately, my best friend, Teresa, as soon as I could minimally recover sufficient composure to articulate coherent, understandable words instead of inarticulate, convulsive sobs, my voice coming out tremulous, choppy, almost unrecognizable, so loaded with accumulated panic and despair. Teresa was an experienced early childhood education teacher, sharp observer of dysfunctional family dynamics through years witnessing problematic interactions during revealing parent-teacher conferences, and more important, crucial, fundamental, she had herself gone through a devastating custodial legal battle 5 years earlier when her controlling ex-husband similarly tried to use the judicial system as a manipulative psychological weapon against her. Laura breathed deeply, slowly, methodically. This is a classic, predictable, deplorable tactic of narcissistic manipulative people when they perceive they're losing control over situations or people they erroneously consider their property. They invert roles, projecting their own destructive abusive behaviors onto the genuine victim through formally presented false accusations, hoping that the overburdened judicial system will superficially accept their narrative without adequate and necessary deep investigation. She explained with a firm, experienced, reassuring voice loaded with knowledge painfully won through her own previous similar ordeal. You need to act quickly, strategically, decisively. Immediately hire an experienced, specialized family law attorney, deeply knowledgeable about genuine parental alienation, manipulative tactics, versus maliciously instrumentalized false accusations. Urgently request your own independent psychological evaluations performed by reputable, impartial professionals before their false narrative establishes itself as unquestioned, presumed truth. Meticulously document absolutely every interaction with Rodrigo, Beatrice, and Miguel, including dates, times, witnesses, detailed contexts, creating an irrefutable chronological record demonstrating who really practices psychologically harmful behaviors. This won't be easy, quick, or financially or emotionally cheap, but it's absolutely essential, fundamental, to protect Miguel and yourself from systematic psychological destruction disguised as legitimate family concern. She continued with controlled urgency while I frantically wrote down every word on crumpled paper with an erratically trembling pen. The following days passed in a dizzying, nauseating whirlwind of militarily coordinated frenetic activity, extended emergency consultation of 4 hours with Dr. Marcelo Fernandez in his office located in a modern, professional commercial building downtown, where I narrated chronologically, detailed, exhaustively the entire story from meeting Rodrigo 15 years ago until the recent devastating accusation, patiently answering, penetrating occasionally, embarrassing but absolutely necessary questions about intimate aspects of the family relationship. Dynamicy with the manipulative mother-in-law, behavioral patterns observed in Miguel when he returned from visits to the paternal house revealing concerning symptoms of suffered emotional manipulation. Dr. Marcelo was an impressive, formidable man with commanding presence, despite medium compact stature, black skin gleaming professionally under the meticulously organized office's fluorescent lighting, neatly trimmed beard shaved with millimetric precision framing an angular face marked by deep concentration wrinkles, dark brown penetrating eyes, instantly cataloging every emotional nuance, narrative inconsistency, relevant detail during the occasionally incoherent account choppy due to persistent emotional trauma. Mrs. Laura, I've worked for 19 years, primarily defending mothers unjustly accused of parental alienation by manipulative family members who insert the judicial system as a tool of continued psychological abuse disguised as a legitimate concern about child well-being. He began after I finished the complete account, leaning forward in his black leather ergonomic chair, long fingers interlaced over an organized desk covered with orderly stacks of complex legal proceedings. I immediately recognized the classic, predictable, deplorable pattern in this case based on decades of accumulated experience. Narcissistic mother-in-law who never accepted losing control over her adult son when he married, interpreted the grandson's birth as an opportunity to recover domineering influence through the child. Progressively resented your natural primary maternal role with me, began subtly but progressively more aggressively undermining your parental authority through constant criticisms disguised as useful advice. Excessive gifts strategically timed to create unfavorable comparisons. Poisonous comments about you in Miguel's presence, planting seeds of doubt about your maternal competence. And finally, when you established necessary healthy boundaries restricting her access to Miguel, she escalated to the nuclear weapon of the narcissistic manipulative arsenal, formal parental alienation accusation, completely inverting factual reality. His words validated profoundly, liberatingly, the confused feelings I had silently, doubtfully carried for years, thinking perhaps I was being hypersensitive, excessively defensive, unfairly critical of a mother-in-law who superficially claimed to only genuinely care about family well-being. We have a solid basis to not only defend you against unfounded accusations, but judicially counterattack through our own action for substantial moral damages caused by deliberate, malicious, defamatory denunciation. Dr. Marcelo continued with professional iron determination. The process will be long, expansive, emotionally draining because we'll need to conduct multiple extensive psychological evaluations of everyone involved, including you, Rodrigo, Beatrice, and Miguel, through reputable specialized forensic professionals whose scientific conclusions will be legally irrefutable. Each evaluation will cost between $25,000 and $35,000 depending on the necessary complexity and extent, but they are absolutely essential fundamental investments to establish objective scientific truth versus emotionally charged subjective narratives presented by both sides. The estimated financial cost was astronomical, terrifying for an independent landscape architect with variable seasonal income dependent on sporadic projects from private clients, potentially $120,000 or more, including legal fees, court costs, multiple specialized psychological evaluations. Every penny laboriously saved during years of dedicated hard work would be completely drained to defend myself against false accusations fabricated by people who should theoretically constitute supportive solidary family. My face must have betrayed growing financial panic because Dr. Marcelo sighed understandingly, his severe professional expression momentarily softening, revealing underlying compassionate humanity. I perfectly understand that costs are prohibitively frightening, but consider the devastating alternative. Losing partial or total custody of Miguel to people genuinely practicing manipulative alienation, allowing their false narrative to establish itself as uncontested judicial truth, permanently affecting the natural healthy maternal relationship. living the rest of your life carrying unjust guilt and psychological trauma of not having fought adequately when you had a crucial opportunity. Besides, when we conclusively prove through irrefutable scientific evidence that the accusations were deliberately maliciously fabricated, subsequent lawsuits for moral damages will potentially substantially recover invested defense values, plus significant additional compensation for psychological suffering intentionally caused through an abusively instrumentalized judicial system. I agreed determinedly, courageously. Despite paralyzing financial terror, signing contingent fee contracts, allowing extended installment payments during the potentially prolonged legal proceeding duration, Teresa generously, solidarily, unconditionally offered to loan $15,000 from personal savings, hardly accumulated during years of poorly paid teaching work, lovingly insisting it was an investment in necessary justice, not an eventually reimbursable loan. You would do exactly the same for me without hesitation, Laura, and I know because when I went through my own devastating custodial judicial ordeal 5 years ago, you were constantly by my side, offering every possible type of emotional, practical, financial support within your then limited capacities, she said, hugging me tight. Long while gratitude tears silently rolled down my tired face marked by accumulated stress. The first specialized forensic psychological evaluation was an experience simultaneously liberating, validating, and agonizingly re-traumatizing. Dr. Helena, a 53-year-old forensic psychologist with 26 years of experience conducting complex parental alienation, judicial expert evaluations, conducted deep, extended interviews during 6 intensive 3-hour sessions, each distributed over 3 weeks, applying extensive batteries of scientifically validated, standardized psychometric tests, observing my interactions with Miguel in a controlled clinical environment through a one-way mirror, separately interviewing reference people including Teresa, work colleagues, neighbors, Miguel's school teachers, building a comprehensive multidimensional portrait of real versus alleged family dynamics. Dr. Helena was an impressive, formidable woman with serene professional presence, cultivated through decades, mediating devastating family conflicts. Brown skin with a simultaneously gentle but penetrating expression, natural graying curly hair, kept short, practically deep brown eyes that seemed to see directly through carefully constructed psychological defenses identifying underlying hidden truths. Laura, after extensive, comprehensive, scientifically rigorous evaluation using internationally validated standardized psychometric instruments, controlled systematic behavioral observations, multiple interviews with independent collateral sources, I can categorically, definitively, unequivocally affirm that there exists absolutely no measurable objective evidence that you practice or practiced any form of parental alienation against Miguel. She announced during the final feedback session when she presented official conclusions extensively documented in an 87-page meticulously written technical report full of statistical graphs, interview transcriptions, detailed comparative and, contrarily, accumulated evidence strongly suggests that Miguel demonstrates consistent symptoms compatible with a child exposed to subtle emotional manipulation during paternal visits, including increased anxiety before scheduled visits, repetitive disproportionately negative comments about you, apparently rehearsed, not spontaneously originated from him, excessive unrealistic idealization of the paternal grandmother inconsistent with direct experiences independently reported by reliable collateral sources. Her words echoed liberatingly, validatingly through the professionally neutral silent office decorated in soft beige and light blue tones. And for the first time in endless months, I felt crushing partial relief having objective scientific truth irrefutably documented, contrasting the maliciously fabricated false narrative. But Dr. Helena continued with a serious professional expression. However, Laura, I need to realistically warn you that although my report is technically solid, scientifically robust, people practicing genuine alienation frequently don't accept professional conclusions contradicting their narratives. We'll continue insisting that evaluators were deceived, incompetent, biased, will request multiple re-evaluations by different professionals, hoping eventually to find someone who confirms their pre-existing bias. Prepare yourself psychologically, financially, for potentially 3, 4, even 5 additional evaluations before a judge finally conclusively determines who is presenting objective truth versus subjective emotional manipulations. Her prediction proved prophetic, painfully accurate over the subsequent 18 months. I underwent additionally for specialized forensic psychological evaluations by different professionals, alternately selected by each procedural party, each costing between $28,000 and $34,000, completely draining laboriously accumulated savings, forcing the sale of a reliable personal vehicle, acceptance of suffocating high interests, personal loans from solidary family members, drastic reduction of living standards, eliminating absolutely all non-essential expenses strictly necessary for basic survival. Rodrigo and Beatriz, apparently financed by mysterious resources never completely clarified considering his prolonged unemployment and her modest retirement, hired aggressive lawyers specialized in intimidating litigious tactics, tirelessly requested repeated reevaluations each time professional conclusions contradicted their false narrative, presented questionable witnesses providing contradictory testimonies, easily refuted under rigorous cross-examination. But absolutely every single one of the 5 independent specialized forensic psychological evaluations conducted by different reputable professionals arrived at identical, consistent, unequivocal conclusions. There was no objectively measurable scientific evidence that I practiced parental alienation. Conversely, progressively accumulated evidence strongly suggested that Miguel was being exposed to subtle emotional manipulations during paternal visits and especially during extended periods under the exclusive care of paternal grandmother Beatriz. The most comprehensive, extensive final report conducted by a multidisciplinary team including 2 forensic psychologists, a child psychiatrist, and a specialized social worker totaled an impressive 132 pages, meticulously documenting every investigated aspect, definitively, categorically, irrefutably concluding. Allegations of parental alienation practiced by Mother Laura Cristina Almeida are unfounded, inconsistent with objective evidence collected, and appear to constitute psychological projection where accusers attribute to the victim behaviors they themselves systematically manifest. Strong recommendation for psychological evaluation of paternal grandmother Beatriz and supervised family therapeutic intervention before resumption of unsupervised visits with the minor, armed with an impressive mountain of irrefutable documented scientific evidence totaling over 400 pages of specialized technical reports. Converging on identical conclusions, Dr. Marcelo initiated a devastating legal counteroffensive criminal prosecution for false accusation specifically against Beatriz as the main intellectual author of the maliciously fabricated false accusations. A complementary civil lawsuit for substantial moral damages, intentionally caused through deliberately inflicted, prolonged psychological suffering, and a judicial request for modification of the visitation regime imposing mandatory professional supervision during paternal visits until completion of adequate restorative family therapy. We have an absolutely solid case. Technically irrefutable, scientifically robust, supported by multiple independent professional consensus. Dr. Marcelo stated confidently during a strategic preparatory meeting for imminent court hearings. Family court judges are generally cautious, conservative in parental alienation cases due to the inherent complexity and difficulty distinguishing truth from emotional manipulations. But when we present overwhelming scientific consensus from 5 independent evaluations, all converging on identical categorical conclusions, there is no reasonable margin for judicial doubt to remain. The definitive court hearing was an experience simultaneously terrifying, liberating, and ultimately vindicating Judge Daniela Moreira, a respected 58-year-old magistrate with 3 decades of specialized experience in complex custody conflicts. She presided over the solemn session in family court where all parties involved testified in person, including me, Rodrigo, clearly uncomfortable, avoiding eye contact. Beatriz maintaining an arrogant, defiant posture even in the face of overwhelming evidence contradicting her narrative. Dr. Helena and 2 more forensic psychologist experts providing specialized technical testimony. Judge Daniela was an impressive, formidable woman of commanding judicial presence. Graying hair kept in a traditional low bun, symbolizing respected authority. Severe but not insensitive dark brown eyes, methodically evaluating presented evidence. Her professionally controlled facial expression, occasionally allowed, contained indignation to show through at the transparent, manipulative tactics employed by the desperate adverse party. After thorough, careful, comprehensive analysis of absolutely all documentary evidence presented, including 5 independent specialized forensic psychological expert reports conducted by unquestionably reputable professionals, multiple witness testimonies, extensive chronological documentation of family interactions. This court definitively, categorically, unequivocally concludes that allegations of parental alienation practiced by Mother Laura Cristina Almeida against Mina Miguel are completely, absolutely, irrefutably unfounded. They constitute malicious, deliberate false accusation instrumentalizing the judicial system as a tool of continued psychological abuse. Judge Daniela pronounced solemnly, her voice echoing authoritatively through the tense, silent courtroom. Accumulated evidence consistently, convergently demonstrates that minor Miguel was exposed to subtle emotional manipulations during paternal visits, particularly under the exclusive care of paternal grandmother Beatriz Mendez Costa, who manifests a behavioral pattern compatible with narcissistic personality disorder, not formally diagnosed but clearly identifiable through specialized technical expert. And the judicial sentence was devastating, comprehensive, transformative for Beatriz. Criminal prosecution for false accusation resulted in conviction with a sentence of 2 years, and for months imprisonment in open regime converted to community service and substantial financial fine. The complementary civil lawsuit for moral damages resulted in conviction ordering payment of $650,000, including material damages corresponding to costs of multiple psychological evaluations, plus pure moral damages calculated based on extensively documented prolonged psychological suffering. Through psychiatric medical reports documenting treatment for generalized anxiety and reactive depression developed during the stressful judicial process. Modification of the visitation regime, temporarily suspending for a minimum period of 12 months all contact between Bea and Miguel until satisfactory completion of individual psychological therapy supervised by a court-appointed professional, with resumption of contacts conditioned on periodic progressive evaluations demonstrating genuine sustained behavioral change. Rodrigo, judicially characterized as a manipulated secondary character, received a severe judicial warning and imposition of a professionally supervised visitation regime until completion of mandatory family therapy demonstrating capacity to establish healthy boundaries with his mother, adequately protecting the psychological well-being of his son. Beatriz desperately, predictably appealed the sentence through all available judicial instances during the subsequent 2 years, but each superior court unanimously ratified the original decision. Based on the unquestionable solidity of the scientific evidence presented, the categorical clarity of the multiple convergent expert conclusions, and the demonstrated gravity of emotional manipulations, systematically perpetrated disguised as legitimate family concern. Eventually, after complete exhaustion of available legal remedies and the beginning of forced judicial execution of the financial conviction through seizure of her residential property, Beatriz completely, definitively disappeared from Miguel's life, ironically, voluntarily perpetrating exactly the relational rupture she falsely claimed to be trying to prevent through fabricated false accusations. Miguel, now 9 years old, participates weekly in specialized child therapy, gradually, healthily processing the psychological traumas suffered during years of exposure to toxic, dysfunctional family dynamics. He progressively demonstrates encouraging signs of emotional recovery, substantially diminished anxiety, natural, childlike spontaneity gradually returning. Relationship with me restored and strengthened through open, honest communication, appropriate for his age, about the traumatic events experienced. Rodrigo, after completion of mandatory family therapy and consensual divorce, finally, judicially granted establishing sole custody with me and paternal visitation progressively liberalized as adequate behavioral capacity is demonstrated, maintains a distant but cordial, polite relationship with me, focused exclusively on Miguel's well-being. He apparently finally devastatingly understands through prolonged therapeutic process how much he allowed his mother's toxic manipulative influence to severely harm his innocent, vulnerable son. Financial resources recovered through compensatory judicial conviction allowed not only to completely reimburse loans contracted during procedural defense, but to establish a substantial educational fund for me, guaranteeing future quality university education independent of my fluctuating financial circumstances, in addition to enabling finally, after years of forced austerity, resumption of a reasonably comfortable standard of living without constant suffocating financial stress. Today, at 41 years old, with a radically, wonderfully transformed life from the existence I lived at 36, when devastating false accusations were cruelly launched, I paradoxically recognized that the terrifying judicial ordeal, although extremely painful, was a necessary involuntary catalyst forcing establishment of definitive healthy boundaries with toxic people, irrefutable objective scientific validation of maternal competence, constantly maliciously questioned, strengthening of psychological resilience through adversity, determinedly overcome. I do not thank for the false accusations, nor completely forgive Beatriz's actions. But I serenely recognize that the courageously faced adversity taught profound lessons about unsuspected inner strength, the importance of meticulous systematic documentation legally protecting against future manipulations, the invaluable value of a supportive solidarity network emotionally sustaining during devastating storms. Miguel has matured remarkably, developing psychological resilience, critical thinking ability, sophisticated emotional intelligence unusual for his age, partially as consequence of traumatic experiences processed healthily therapeutically therapeutically rather than suppress denied destructively. He demonstrates ability to identify, verbalize complex emotions articulately. He questions respectfully but firmly dubious narratives or manipulative behaviors when exposed to them, maintains solid, healthy sense of self-worth, validated consistently through unconditional love demonstrated through consistent, reliable actions, not empty words. I am extraordinarily, profoundly proud of the resilient, empathetic, emotionally intelligent young man. He is progressively becoming despite, or perhaps partially because of adversities faced during formative years. Beatrice remains completely, definitively absent from Miguel's life by her own voluntary choice after exhausting all possible legal remedies, attempting to reverse the sententially established contact suspension. She never fulfilled the mandatory individual therapeutic requirement judicially established as a necessary condition for eventual progressive resumption of supervised contacts with her grandson. Apparently, interpreting the therapeutic requirement as an implicit admission of psychological culpability unacceptable to her inflexible, narcissistic ego, incapable of recognizing personal responsibility for destructive consequences of systematic manipulative behaviors. I heard indirectly through Rodrigo's casual comment during visitation exchange that Beatrice moved to a distant coastal city approximately 370 miles away after court-forced sale of her apartment. Allegedly living modestly with limited resources from public retirement, supplemented occasionally by private literature tutoring for pre-college students, Rodrigo maintained sporadic, irregular phone contact with her, apparently out of residual filial obligation sense, but has finally established appropriate, healthy boundaries, firmly refusing to discuss matters related to Miguel or to me during brief, superficial, infrequent conversations. He reports that she never voluntarily mentions Miguel or legal proceedings, behaving as if her grandson simply did not exist or had tragically died. A classic, narcissistic, defensive, psychological mechanism of denying inconvenient reality not aligned with her preferred narrative. Paradoxically, Beatrice's complete definitive absence from Miguel's life proved therapeutically beneficial, allowing remaining family relationships to breathe freely without constant tension of subtle, emotional manipulations progressively poisoning family atmosphere. Miguel occasionally asks casually, curiously about his absent paternal grandmother, especially when school friends comment about grandmothers actively involved in their lives. And I respond honestly, age-appropriately, explaining in simplified terms that sometimes adults make harmful choices, distancing themselves from people they love instead of changing problematic behaviors, and that her absence absolutely reflects nothing about his inherent value as a person loved unconditionally. I taught Miguel from early on the fundamental concept that genuine, authentic love consistently manifests through respectful, healthy actions, not just empty words or strategic material gifts, and that he absolutely deserves family relationships characterized by mutual respect, honest communication, unconditional support, even during inevitable disagreements. Healthy boundaries gently but firmly established and mutually respected. I deeply hope that lessons painfully learned through our traumatic family ordeal will equip him in the future with psychological tools to identify, avoid toxic, dysfunctional relationships, reproducing destructive intergenerational patterns. I eventually, cautiously began dating again approximately 3 years after the legally finalized divorce. Initially, strongly resisting well-intentioned suggestions from Teresa and other concerned friends. That prolonged romantic social isolation was neither therapeutically healthy nor necessary as self-punitive penance for previous relational mistakes. I met Daniel fortuitously during a professional networking event for architects, landscapers, interior designers organized by Professional Class Association. He's a 42-year-old agricultural engineer specialized in sustainable ecological landscaping. Curiously sharing similar professional interests, although slightly different complementary technical approaches, Daniel was divorced for 6 years with no children from his previous brief marriage of only 4 years. His calm, respectful, emotionally mature personality refreshingly contrasted with Rodrigo's psychological immaturity and Beatrice's manipulative aggressiveness. The relationship developed slowly, naturally, organically over 18 months through casual encounters, progressively more frequent, deep conversations, exploring values, expectations, vulnerable personal histories gradually shared as mutual trust solidly established itself. Daniel demonstrated extraordinary patient understanding, respecting clearly communicated boundaries, never pressuring premature emotional or physical intimacy, graciously accepting the cautious, deliberately slow pace of rebuilding relational trust after devastating previous traumas. I formally introduced Daniel to Miguel only after 12 months of stable, consistent dating, when both of us felt sufficient security and confidence that the relationship possessed long-term permanence potential, justifying the emotional involvement of a vulnerable child already traumatized by previous family relational losses. Miguel initially reacted with typical childlike cautious curiosity, but gradually warmed to Daniel over subsequent months as he consistently demonstrated genuine, authentic interest in Miguel's childish passions about dinosaurs, astronomy, construction of complex architectural blocks. Patiently, enthusiastically participating in shared activities without trying to prematurely force an inappropriate pseudo-paternal holy. Currently, 5 years after that devastating fateful morning when the process server called notifying me about maliciously fabricated false accusations, life has stabilized wonderfully into a comfortable, healthy normalcy that seemed impossible and unreachable during the darkest periods of the exhausting legal battle. Miguel is thriving academically, socially, emotionally at school, demonstrating curious intelligence, imaginative creativity, natural empathy for classmates. His previous anxiety has substantially diminished, becoming an occasional rarity instead of a chronic, permanent, debilitating state. His relationship with me is affectionate, open, trusting, characterized by honest two-way communication where he feels safe sharing concerns, doubts, joys knowing he will be heard respectfully, emotionally validated, appropriately guided without severe critical judgment or dismissive minimization of legitimate feelings. The landscaping business continues to flourish consistently, providing comfortable, secure financial stability, allowing not only adequate sustenance, but also modest occasional luxuries like annual family trips to culturally enriching educational destinations. Enriching extracurricular activities for Miguel, including swimming lessons, educational robotics, artistic drawing, developing diverse potential skills, the relationship with Daniel has progressed solidly, healthily into a mutually committed, serious relationship. We occasionally discuss the possibility of eventual future marriage, but without urgent rush because we both value natural, gradual consolidation of a solid relational foundation over hastily premature, formal, symbolic rituals. Teresa remains my closest best friend, loyal confidant, genuinely celebrating hard-won victories, consistently offering emotional support during inevitable minor daily challenges, regularly humorously reminding me how far I've journeyed since those initial dark days when it seemed impossible to imagine a hopeful future beyond basic daily survival. Dr. Marcelo has become not just a trusted attorney, but a respected, admired friend, occasionally consulting me informally as an expert witness in similar cases of falsely alleged parental alienation where my lived experience offers valuable perspective complementing his technical, legal, and I volunteer regularly, monthly at a local non-governmental organization, supporting mothers facing unjust custodial legal battles, sharing my personal story not to glorify suffering, but to demonstrate concretely, tangibly that recovery is possible. Justice, although slow and expensive, is achievable. Reconstruction after devastation is viable with persistent determination. Solidary community support, adequate professional resources. Each woman helped and guided through the confusing, intimidating labyrinth of the family court system partially represents redemption, transforming individual past pain into beneficial collective present and future purpose. Dr. Helena honorably invited me to speak occasionally at professional specialized seminars on parental alienation directed at mental health professionals, legal practitioners, social workers, offering the unique, valuable perspective of someone who directly experienced maliciously instrumentalized false accusations, extensive multiple expert evaluation processes, prolonged legal battle, subsequent gradual psychological recovery. Speaking publicly about traumatic experiences was initially terrifying emotionally, but progressively revealed itself to be therapeutic and cathartic, transforming silent, isolating shame into vocal educational advocacy benefiting others. I learned profoundly, painfully, definitively through devastating ordeal that the Brazilian family court system, although overburdened, slow, is fundamentally capable of identifying objective scientific truth when properly presented through robust evidence meticulously documented by reputable, impartial, specialized professionals. I learned that substantial financial investment in competent legal defense and rigorous scientific expert evaluations is not an optional luxury, but an absolutely essential fundamental necessity when facing serious accusations potentially destroying a natural, healthy maternal relationship. I learned that a solidary support network of loyal friends, understanding family members, competent, compassionate professionals is literally life-saving vital during periods of extreme crisis when it seems impossible to continue fighting against apparently insurmountable injustices. I learned that psychological resilience does not mean absence of suffering or pain, but the capacity to continue functioning productively despite suffering and pain, actively seeking professional therapeutic help when necessary instead of suffering silently, heroically alone in isolation. I learned that genuine forgiveness does not require relational reconciliation nor absolution of deserved consequences, but in a release of corrosive anger, consuming precious emotional energy, better invested in building a positive future instead of obsessive rumination about irreversible past and I did not forgive Beatrice in the sense of desiring resumed family relationship or minimizing the gravity of her destructive actions, but I forgave in the sense of emotionally freeing myself from the need for continued vengeance. Beyond the judicial justice already satisfactorily achieved, Miguel is now an intelligent, curious, empathetic, creative 12-year-old pre-adolescent, gradually developing his own singular, distinct identity from previous family traumas that marked but did not completely define his existence. He appropriately understands for his age that his family was different, challenging, complicated, but not irreparably broken nor devoid of abundant, genuine love. He knows profoundly, unquestionably, that he is unconditionally loved by me, adequately cared for by his functionally present, though emotionally reserved father, supported by an extensive community of reliable, responsible adults genuinely invested in his well. Occasionally, during deep nighttime conversations at bedtime, when Miguel becomes philosophically reflective characteristic of pre-adolescents exploring complex existential questions, he asks thoughtfully about his absent paternal grandmother, whether she thinks of him, whether she regretted her choices, whether reconciliation is possible in the future. I always respond honestly appropriately that I don't know the definitive answers to those questions because Beatrice voluntarily chose complete absence instead of the accountability necessary for a restored, healthy relationship. That doors remain theoretically open for future reconciliation if she genuinely demonstrates sustained behavioral change professionally validated, but that he absolutely should not feel responsible for her absence, nor guilty for establishing healthy boundaries protecting him. I explained to him carefully, repeatedly as necessary, that healthy, authentic love never demands tolerance of harmful behaviors as the price of relationship. That emotionally protecting oneself from people practicing systematic manipulations is not cruel selfishness, but wise, necessary self-care, that he absolutely deserves relationships characterized by genuine mutual respect, not just empty words. I deeply hope that painfully learned lessons will equip him in the future with tools to identify, establish, maintain healthy boundaries in personal and professional relationships, avoiding repeating dysfunctional intergenerational patterns, looking back retrospectively through the temporal lens. Of 5 years since the beginning of the judicial nightmare, I serenely recognize that the journey, although terrifying and devastating, was ultimately transformative, catalytic, revealing of unsuspected inner strengths and previously underestimated resilience capacities. I would not voluntarily choose to relive the trauma. I do not minimize the intense psychological suffering cruelly inflicted during those years. I do not thank Beatrice for the devastation intentionally caused, but I paradoxically acknowledge that the overcome adversity strengthened me substantially, clarified authentic priority values, taught profound lessons about relational discernment, courageous self-determination, assertive advocacy for my own legitimate rights. Individual therapy formally concluded after 3 years of consistent, productive, transformative weekly sessions. But I maintain occasional contact with my therapist through sporadic quarterly preventive maintenance sessions, or as needed during transitional periods of increased stress. The psychological tools acquired during the extensive therapeutic process, including mindfulness, anxiety management techniques, nonviolent assertive communication strategies, compassionate self-care practices instead of severe punitive self-criticism, remain permanently integrated into my daily behavioral repertoire, serving protectively during the inevitable challenges of complex, stressful, contemporary adult life. Miguel continues child therapy, currently reduced to bi-weekly sessions instead of weekly, as anxious symptoms consistently decrease, indicating healthy progressive processing of previous traumas. His child therapist projects formal therapeutic conclusion within approximately 18 additional months as he consolidates emotional regulation skills, cognitive processing of challenging experiences, assertive communication of emotional needs appropriately without significant sustained symptomatic regressions. The functional cooperative co-parenting relationship with Rodrigo stabilized status into a predictable, reliable pattern characterized by respectful communication, strictly limited to practice practical matters related to Miguel joined but emotionally separate attendance at important school events like theatrical presentations and graduation ceremonies. Collaborative, consultative decisions about significant issues like future secondary school choice and extracurricular activities, developing his natural talents. We are not intimate, confidential friends, nor do we wish to be, but we are adequate functional co-parents, jointly prioritizing Miguel's shared well-being above residual personal resentments or remaining relational discomforts. Rodrigo recently married his previously mentioned girlfriend. In a small, intimate civil ceremony where Miguel participated as a proud, happy child best man, demonstrating impressive emotional maturity and capacity to genuinely celebrate paternal happiness without feeling threatened or abandoned. I briefly met Rodrigo's new wife during a shared school event, and she seemed a genuinely pleasant, respectful person, appropriately cautious about establishing clear relational boundaries with his biological son from a previous relationship without trying to prematurely force inappropriate pseudo-maternal intimacy. Beatrice remains an absent ghost on the margins of the family narrative, mentioned rarely and increasingly less frequently as years pass, and life continues progressing healthily without her toxic presence systematically poisoning relational dynamics. Rodrigo casually mentioned during a recent logistical phone conversation that she had attempted contact with him, requesting updated information about Miguel, including recent photographs. But he firmly, gently refused, explaining that he respects judicially established boundaries, protecting his son's psychological well-being, and that doors remain open for her if she demonstrates genuine commitment to professionally validated behavioral change through compliance with previously defiantly ignored therapeutic requirements. I don't know if Beatrice will eventually comply with mandatory therapeutic requirements, enabling progressive, supervised resumption of contacts with Miguel, or will remain stubbornly absent, indefinitely preferring self-perceived martyrdom and unjust victimization over the responsible accountability necessary for a restored, healthy relationship. Honestly, I no longer invest significant emotional energy speculating about her psychological motivations or future reconciliation possibilities, because present life demands focused attention and limited energies wisely invested in healthy, productive relationships actively cultivated instead of toxic, destructive relationships artificially maintained by cultural obligation and external social expectations. If reconciliation eventually occurs, in the future conditioned on genuine, sustained behavioral changes, independently validated professionally by qualified, impartial therapists, I will approach the situation cautiously, protectively, absolutely, unquestionably prioritizing Miguel's psychological well-being over any secondary considerations. But I do not anxiously, expectantly await that scenario, nor build optimistic, reconciliatory fantasies based on naive hope instead of concrete, objectively measurable behavioral evidence. This is my story. Devastation, battle, overcoming, reconstruction, transformation. The story of a mother fighting fiercely, relentlessly for a natural, healthy maternal relationship unjustly threatened by maliciously fabricated false accusations, investing absolutely every available financial and emotional resource in competent legal defense and objective, scientific validation, ultimately emerging not just judicially victorious but truly psychologically transformed. A story demonstrating concretely, tangibly that the family court system, although imperfect, slow, expensive, is fundamentally capable of identifying objective truth when robust scientific evidence is properly presented by competent specialized professionals. If you are facing a similar situation of false accusations of parental alienation, maliciously instrumentalized by narcissistic manipulative family members, know profoundly that you are not alone. Your experience is valid and real, even when others doubt, question. Investment in competent legal defense and rigorous scientific expert evaluations is absolutely essential, fundamental, not optional. A solidary support network is literally life-saving, vital during the darkest periods. And recovery, although slow and painful, is genuinely possible, achievable, tangible. Don't give up, keep fighting. The truth ultimately prevails. Thank you for listening to my story until the end. If this account resonated with you, help us by sharing it with other people who might benefit from this message of hope, overcoming, achieved justice. Subscribe to the channel, activate notifications for more inspiring, transformative stories. Always remember, you are infinitely stronger, more resilient, more capable than any temporary adversity falsely suggests.